the fact of having.
Oh, we're live.
Okay, so here we are. Welcome, guys. We're glad.
Thank you.
Good to see y'all. So this is the Heart of the Dungeon panel, and we have our 4 wonderful authors that are joining us today. Dakota Krout, author of the best-selling Divine Dungeon and Completionist Chronicles. Jonathan Brooks, author of Dungeon Crafting Series. Gage Lee, author of the Swords and Serpents series. And finally, Joshua Kern, author of the Dungeon Ilaria series. So we're going to give a little bit of time to each of the authors to announce any new books that they have coming or to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Dakota.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dakota Krout. I am an author and the owner of Mountain Press. And I think I got onto this panel for Divine Dungeon, probably. So it's an awesome series. If you haven't read it, definitely check it out. There's lots of other great series, similar. I mean, obviously, these guys are all here for the same thing, so definitely check them, of course, out. And there's a whole group of. Obviously, this is a subgenre within the genre, so definitely go and check it out. Otherwise, for new books that I have coming out sometime soon, I just put out a pre-order for the second in the Wolfman Warlock series, so it's the Librio Hexer. So if you've read Bibliomancer, the second one's just coming out, and within the next month or so, we should see a pre-order for anything as well. So for Full Murder Hobo, anything. So if you haven't read something yet, I have something for you, and then soon I'll have anything for you, and then pretty quick after that, I'll have everything for you. So if yeah, it's good stuff. And whoever's next, then. Do I pick?
We'll head off to Jonathan.
All right. John Brooks. I've been writing for about a little over 3 years. Actually, about 4 years now. I have 10 different series. Most of them are complete right now. So I have the Dungeon Crafting, Dungeon World, Station Cores. I have my Dungeon of Chance series. And then I have one I co-wrote with Jeffrey Logue. That's the Bio Dungeon. I have try to think what else. There's so many. Glendaria Awakens. That was my first trilogy I wrote. And I have a new one. My Dimensional Dungeon Cores is actually a crossover. It is actually crossing over my Station Core series with my Dungeon Crafting series, and it will also cross over with a couple of my other completed series as well. So that's a lot of fun. That one just came out earlier this month, and then I have coming out in next week, actually, the 4th book in my Spirit Core series for Halloween. Quite a bit different. It's a paranormal horror LitRPG dungeon core. So very few of those out there, and it's a lot more graphic than my other works, but it's a lot of fun for people who like that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much what I've got.
All right, Gage, let's hear what you have.
Yeah, I'm the author of the School of Swords and Serpents series, like they were saying earlier, and I have my first Dungeon Core series, Cards of Cthulhu. We'll start posting next week. So if you want to follow up on that, just follow my Facebook page. There'll be links and all that good stuff there.
Nice. And we'll go to Josh.
My name is Joshua Kern. I wrote the Game of God series along with the Dungeon Ilaria and the Ridden. I have a new story coming out called The Portals of Albion that is already on Royal Road. I just finished the first book and have started on the second one. So you can see that coming to Amazon fairly soon. Just waiting on the cover.
Cool.
Very nice. Okay. So let's let's get started. For those of us who may not be all that familiar with Dungeon Core, we're going to start with a very simple question. So how is writing a sentient dungeon different from writing a human? Or elf, kobold, vampire?
Who are you
Anyone
asking?
can answer this one.
Oh, okay.
I'll start just because I was actually thinking about this last night. And for me, it really starts with how you approach it first. So a sentient dungeon, unless you start with the human component, completely does not have human emotions. It does not understand the emotional quotient. It does not. I don't know how to phrase that, but it does not understand humans. It's completely an alien being. It doesn't understand humans at all, how they interact. I mean, you got to find some way to humanize it for the reader. You have to have an avatar or something else. You have to find some way to make them expressive to the reader. So, I mean, that would be, for me at least, one of the beginning difficulties, I guess, that would make it different. Sorry, that may have been kind of jumbled.
I mean, for me, I would say the biggest difference for me, and kind of why I moved away from writing Dungeon Core, is that you're writing a place, right? And so anything new, anything that is going to be pushing the story forward is going to have to come from the outside, right? So, I mean, you can have a really good time like building and exploring your own power and really like focusing on the crafting of things. You can really have a ton of fun with the magic system and like the ability to do things at a level and at a depth that you can't really do with a human character because your character would have starved to death like 6 times. But when you are trying to kind of drive plot forward, you need external things, right? In most stories, so in most series, what you can do is you can go and go to a new area in search of adventure, in search of like all these things. But in this case, what you're trying to do is draw the adventure toward your main character. And so that's one of the things that can make it so very different from the standard, hero's adventure of writing, is that you are essentially writing a book about crafting with adventure, not the other way around. Right. And so that's, I would say, one of the biggest differences in Dungeon Core to another series, at least to me. Right. Yeah.
Okay. It's really interesting.
Okay.
I can go next.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I find it different because I really get to explore different things than the interactions between like adventurers necessarily. Adventurers, even in video games, like the VR games, guilds and all that other kind of stuff. I get to explore the other parts of their experience in a dungeon, and that's what I really like the most, and that's why I love Dungeon Core is you getting the other perspective. So that's what I think is most different is the other LitRPG or even fantasy stories, anything like that. You're not getting necessarily the perspective of the dungeon itself, and I love that aspect of Dungeon Core, and that's why I think it really appeals to me.
Yeah, I kind of approach it as a fan of the old Dungeon Keeper games, right? Where it's not about the main character is actually like a splinter of a bunch of different characters, right? You have a chance to use a bunch of viewpoints that you don't have to keep around, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I like it, because you can feed in adventurers that for one story that explore certain themes, like you were saying about their relationships and their relationship to the dungeon, and then you don't have to keep them. You can move to a totally different set of characters next time around.
Well, absolutely. So we have a question from Zach Risley. He's wondering, is there any chance of a bard or music-based dungeon core where music is a huge part of it?
Dude, I'm like, yeah, go for it. I mean, no reason not to. Like, I could totally see in like 6 months a music dungeon coming out. I do that. Go for it. Absolutely.
Okay.
As,
I had a lot of fun with my my only non-dungeon core series, my Uniworld Online. I had a lot of fun with music. I made up songs. Part of it's a bard kind of based class. So I could definitely see doing something like that because you can do a ton with that, and it would be a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. I have to say, like, that's one of my series that I love right now. I'm currently reading.
Awesome.
So, what other challenges does a dungeon face that are unique to dungeons?
And go.
Resource management.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, resource management. You have to. You really have to think about other aspects of their existence than just what armor or weapon I'm going to have, or even magic I'm going to cast. You have to build things from the ground up. You have to really in other RPG books, you have to design the mechanics of the game and all that kind of stuff. This you have to design the mechanics of how they actually create their dungeon, how they actually place their monsters, traps, whatever you have going on in your kind of dungeon core. So I think that's the most unique challenge I can think of for those.
Yeah, working off what he said, you got the loot. You have tempting the mortals to come in. Why are they coming in? What keeps them coming? The growth of the dungeon, the trap creation, the monster creation, expansion. You have all these different things, and then you have the finding something that'll explain to the dungeon about the outside world. That will keep the adventurers coming in outside of just the loot. I mean, all these different things have to be integrated into the initial dungeon mechanics.
And I would say one more thing. So I saw a comment that just came in that really actually is a big part of this. So it was the comment is like, what is the importance of the dungeon fairy or other similar things?
I was going to bring that up.
So like why is it ever so present and all that stuff, and kind of because what can happen with dungeon core really easily is that you can get sucked into just giving info dumps, right? Because of all the things that these guys just talked about that are really super important to the story, like the magic, the interpersonal actions and reactions, all this other stuff, like of all the people. When it comes to the dungeon, no one is supposed to really be able to speak to the dungeon, right? Like no one is supposed to know that it's a living thing that is actively seeking to eat them, right? And so if you don't have a way for your character to bounce ideas off of someone else or have someone giving guidance, whatever it is, it's really hard to progress storyline because I could straight up write a book. I could write 110,000 words really easily on just making stuff. Like, hey, you know what? I'm going to do my research on this and go at the molecular level and start building it up, applying enchantments, all this other stuff. And then I have like a couple of items. I don't have a story, I have a technical manual. And so that's kind of that's really the usefulness of that dungeon fairy. It's a companion to the main character that is super important to the main story. That's why you see it in everything.
Oh, absolutely. So this is coming from Jedrius Diefendorfer. I hope I got that right.
Awesome. That's a super cool name.
If you were to personally be transmigrated into a dungeon core, what would your signature mob type be and why?
Goblins. It's got to be goblins. They're devious,
Okay.
they're sneaky. There's millions of them. Constantly underestimated.
Slimes. They just have the best evolution path.
Foxes, man. Foxes and kitsune. That's devious right there.
Nice.
Fast and sleek.
That's seriously devious.
I was going to say goblins too, because there's so many different kinds you can get, and there's a ton of them, and I just want to Zerg with them.
I would definitely go with like chimera type stuff. Just start splicing stuff together. Oh, I do love the idea of a mimic dungeon though, right? Like,
Nothing but mimics.
like,
I can just imagine that.
You just
Oh, that's
you lay down on your bed and you snuggle into your soft pillow, and then it closes around your face.
The door's a mimic, the floor is a mimic, everything's a mimic.
That's right.
Just waiting.
If it's not a mimic, it's a rot grub.
And then it turns out the adventurer was a mimic the whole time. It was just a test run.
Just waiting for you to let down your guard.
Okay.
That's pretty fun.
So going a little bit more serious, who were some of your influences that got you started on writing Dungeon Core?
Well, I mean, realistically, I didn't even know that there were other dungeon books out when I was writing Dungeon, like when I was writing the Divine Dungeon, right? I think like Slime Dungeon came out something like 3 months before my first book came out. And if anyone here has ever written a book, your first book is usually the one that takes the longest, So I had been working on that for freaking ever. And so I was actually super disappointed when I found out that someone had already gotten a Dungeon Core book before me, because I was like, man, I thought being unique, No, man, but like I grew up playing like anytime I could get access to a computer, it was like hop on and play Fate, right? Or Torchlight, or what was that one game? Empire was another great one, where you're like building the dungeon out. So it's kind of like Dungeon Lord, Dungeon Master sort of things, where you're doing these. So I wouldn't say I had a ton of like book inspirations, but I definitely had a lot of video game inspirations. So yeah, that and playing a lot of D&D. Yeah, like when you had to plan how to kill all the adventures that come through you, or come through your campaign. I mean, that's honestly one of the best ways to get used to being a Dungeon Core author, is like, hey, how am I going to kill these people super creatively so they want to play again? Yeah.
Well, I have to say my inspiration was Divine Dungeon and Slime Dungeon. After those, I searched out every single Dungeon Core story I could find. I just read them, everything I could find on Amazon. I didn't even know about Royal Road back then, so I didn't even know where else to look. So at one point, I read every single thing I could find, and I did not find the story I wanted to read. And that was the reason why I wrote my first book, because I couldn't find a story that was a Dungeon Core in a video game. There was nothing out there. It was all just fantasy worlds or that kind of stuff, or even sci-fi worlds. But nothing was in a video game. So I ended up just writing it myself, and it worked for me, I thought.
I would say so. I've enjoyed it.
For me, my inspiration was a little bit Dakota Krout with his books, and then also I used to really want to make video games with the old program. What was it called? RPG Maker, I think that's what it was.
Oh, yes.
I played around with that back in the day. And if you read Dungeon Alaria, I kind of took it in a completely different direction from a lot of the Dungeon Core stories. And that's because of RPG Maker and my experiences with that. And so, I mean, that's what got me into it, is a combination of those two things. Dakota Krout was my introduction into the Dungeon Core scene, honestly. And then I kind of combined it with RPG Maker and Game of Gods. I had to create a side story for that one, a continuation for the universe. So
awesome, man.
Yeah, mine all just goes back to way too much D&D. way too much D&D. I was in a group of forever DMs, and we would swap dungeons around so we could test them with parties of NPCs. So that's where I started with. And then I saw Dakota published a book about it and did really well. And I said, well, maybe we'll give it a shot.
I can appreciate that. So on that same note, why is it, since we have Dungeon Core books, that you think that we don't actually have Dungeon Core games these days?
We do.
Yeah, we had Dungeon Keeper that just got remade.
We have. Okay. So that was.
I don't remember the name of it, but there was this one where you were a villain creating your own like dungeon or something. I remember reading about it a couple of years ago. I just don't remember what the name of it is. But yeah, there are a couple of them.
It's Evil Mastermind.
That might actually be it.
Yeah.
Where you have henchmen.
Empire, IMP, Empire is also one. So that was mine that I did for a long time. Yeah, but otherwise, like cultivation stuff is kind of, I don't think it would do well as a video game. Like sit your character down and have them cultivate for the next 600 years. Tends to it's kind of
patience games. Patience games don't work well.
Right.
Yeah, I actually have it's a game coming out on Steam next month, based on my dungeon crafting series. It's more of a tower defense, so it's not like dungeons or dungeon keeper and that kind of stuff like that. So it's a little bit different. Didn't want to kind of try to copy that, so it's a little bit different. So I think as more people learn about Dungeon Core and dungeon stuff like that, you'll see some more games out there.
Just a matter of refining the game formula for actual games.
Mm-hmm.
I can appreciate that. Okay, so this is a question from a Facebook user. How much research goes into the structure of a dungeon and structure and the character lore?
I mean, it depends.
So, I know that's pretty vague.
So I've tried to find a dungeon so that I can better explore it, but just they wouldn't let me in. So so I mean, most of the time, it's a lot of it is just trying to map out something that works well. Like I always drew out each floor that I was going to do and tried to have a good idea so that I didn't cross the streams and do things I wasn't supposed to do in places I wasn't supposed to do them. So a lot of it is just like making sure that it works well and you can come back to it and use it over and over. But I mean, otherwise it's a lot of it. It's just writing, like just like with anything else, it's a cross between inspiration and seeing what works and what sounds realistic enough to work if it were fantasy, like acid traps and stuff like that. Yeah, kind of making it progressive. I don't know. It's there's a lot that goes into it, but just like writing anything, I would say it takes time and effort. So yeah,
which is completely understood.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have a comment on that?
I don't really do too much research into the structure of the dungeon, only like other things like crafting and stuff like that, or the mechanics of it. But as far as research, it's more inspiration from video games or anything like that. So
okay.
Yeah, it's for research. It's definitely. Forgot what I was going to say, but I mean it's fantasy, so you don't have to do too much for certain parts of it. But if I'm going to be referencing it constantly, then I want it to stay consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely want it to make sense in that regard.
Yeah, copious notes, lots and lots of notebooks, so that you don't
map.
Don't forget what you did before.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. So we already know that Dakota has reached into this side of things, so I'm going to direct this next question to John, Josh, and Gage. Do any of y'all plan on teaming up with other authors to publish books in worlds that you've created?
I've thought about it. I actually approached an author about doing a sci-fi story for Game of Gods involving the space station that appeared in Game of Gods 4. It's kind of in limbo at the moment, but yeah. So I've definitely thought about it. I'm not entirely sure if it'll go anywhere. I don't really want to hand over the reins to something in my universe. It's my baby, but it's something I've thought about.
Yeah, it's a matter of finding the right person, right? I've done some collaboration stuff, and you just, I'm not opposed to it, but it can be hard to find a balance where you're not throwing punches at the end of the day, right? Whoever lets you come play in their world, you just need to be nice to them. That's the story.
Yeah, I've already participated in another author's, Jeffrey's Slime Dungeon series. The Bio Dungeon is actually based in that universe.
Nice.
But with my newest series, the Dimensional Dungeon Cores, it's possible for me to go into other authors' works because they are traveling to a different dimensions, and that's how I'm connecting all of my different series. So theoretically, they could travel to another dimension that has, Divine Dungeon or Elemental Dungeon or any other kind of dungeon stories. It's possible I could even go to Slime Dungeon. That might be fun. But yeah, it really depends on how you work it. But that's kind of, I don't really have any plans to do that, but it's possible.
Anything from you, Gage?
Yeah, like I said, I've done some collaboration before, and it's just, it's just a matter of finding the right partners. It's kind of tricky. As authors, I think most writers become writers because they want to make stuff. And then when somebody else comes to play in your world, sometimes they want to break stuff. So that can be a little challenging. I like I said, I've written with other people, and it's just, you just have to find the balance. So.
Yeah, which is completely understood. So we know that Dakota has used a little bit of his military background to help with writing his stories. Is there any other experience that you have found comes in handy when building your world mechanics?
To who?
To any of you, like.
No.
Well, I'll say, so I worked in retail for 20 years, so that didn't really add too much. But I really like statistics. I like the mechanics of the games. So video games really had an influence on, kind of what I've written. And I tend to have a lot of stats in my games, or my books. So if you've ever read them, there's a lot of stat tables. I do a lot of, really digging into the different aspects of it like that. So I really love statistics. I took that in school, and I really enjoyed it. And I can use those kind of things to kind of expand on my dungeon core mechanics.
Okay.
Lots and lots of years of D&D. D&D and Magic the Gathering. I think those are the two things that honed my mechanical skills, I guess. Lots and lots of games.
Okay.
I would say that for me, a lot of it was programming as well. So I don't know how many people here in this group have computer backgrounds of some sort, or like technology backgrounds, but I'm guessing at least a little bit, right? And part of it is just it puts a different methodology of thinking in your head. If this, then this, then this, and that works really well for trap making or creating monsters or whatever else is needed to make cool things, right? And so honestly, a lot of LitRPG, like a lot of the people have really technical backgrounds, like medical law or I don't know anyone that has medical law, but tech, IT or programming or stuff like that, or engineers. I see a lot of like really technical professions that come and end up in our genre, and I think that's because it's kind of needed. To be able to do what we do, you had to really be able to think in that way, and I think that works really well because it resonates with a lot of people. So that's also probably why we have the smartest fans out of all the genres out there, right? I mean, that's what I think, at least. Got to understand what you're reading.
Yeah. I went to school for electrical engineering, but I mean, the way I was raised, my dad was very much a handyman, the master of none, but he knew everything kind of guy. So my characters tend to exhibit that. They know a lot of different things, but the master of none. So
sure,
that's the way I approach a lot of my books.
Yeah, oftentimes better than
big
master
of a fan
of one,
of stats,
right?
though.
So I've been thinking about this myself for a while. Each of you have your book on Audible, and so when it came to the narrator, what reasons did you have to choose the specific narrator or that you work with?
Yeah, I may be an oddball, but I cannot stand to listen to my own audiobooks. Like, it's the worst, the absolute most horrible experience of my life. Yep. And my narrator is great, right? But I just, I kindly requested that they send me samples of other stuff than mine, because all I can hear is mistakes I made every time I hear one of my audiobooks. So, yeah. I just went for somebody that he was enthusiastic. He had a good range, and he was easy to listen to. So,
same. Neil's great. I enjoy his voice. I'm having him do the Sentient book in a couple months, but yeah, just I don't really like audiobooks as it is. They were never my thing growing up. I very much was I preferred the paper. So getting audiobooks, period, was a learning experience for me. I had to have it pounded into my head that people wanted them.
I read just so fast that it's never been a thing for me. But I mean, I love creating audiobooks. I think it's the coolest thing, right? Like, yeah, it's super cool. But I have only listened to one of my own audiobooks the whole way through. Like that was Rexus, like it was intended to be like it was an intentionally silly book, right? Just intended to be funny and ridiculous, and it was just so beautifully done. And he really nailed that character well. But for me, when I'm looking for a narrator, typically what I look for is the first thing is, are they popular in our genre, right? Do people in our genre like them? Do they have a big following in our genre? Because that's the biggest thing. Like if people are already listening to them, they might want to listen to that person more. Secondary to that is, do they have a big audience of their own, right? So like if I'm hiring a narrator, it's if I'm going to be trying to work with someone who is going to charge, a pretty high rate, I want to make sure that they have a fan base or a following of their own that might potentially add to mine. Like Luke Daniels does some of my series right now, and he did Iron Druid series. He did like a bunch of other things that are much more popular mainstream fantasy, and the hope when we were hiring him was that would pull in more mainstream fantasy audience, right? And so kind of striking a balance between popularity and usefulness, and can we get them? Can we afford to get them? All this other stuff. You know, there's a lot of things that go into hiring anyone, and really that's what you're doing. You're hiring someone. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mine were all auditions on ACX, and basically just picked the best ones I could find. And Miles has been awesome for me for doing almost all of my books. Luis doing my dungeon crafting. You know, I fell in love with her voice when I heard it, and Sarah doing some other my Spirit Core and Glendaria Awakened. She did those ones, and you know that one, she knocked those out of the park. I really enjoyed working with her, and you know that's pretty much how I picked them, was through auditions.
Okay, that's completely understood. So we've had a previous question from a Facebook user. What advice would you give for beginning writers? And this is to each of you.
Write a lot. Don't stop. Yeah, I think when you're starting out, the more you write, the better off you'll be. I think I don't know what's the saying. The first 1,000,000 words is not good. That's the nice way of saying it. But it gets better and it gets easier. The more you write, the easier it gets. Right? So that's the only advice I have. Just read a lot and write a lot.
So I like that comment that are beards required? Yes, beards are required.
Definitely.
Or just wear one. Wear a fake beard.
Paste it on.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I think for Dungeon Core you have to have a beard, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yep, pretty much.
No, that's funny, man. No, I gave out. So I talked to a lot of people that want to be authors, and I would say most of the time, especially so for our particular genres, right? So LitRPG, game lit, Dungeon Core, whatever it is. Since what we do is so very specific, and since most of it is shown to the reader, and they'll call you out on things that you mess up, right? Like, you guys have never had that experience. I'd be very surprised. But first thing I usually tell people is front load the work, right? So I oftentimes will get someone who comes to me and says, "Hey, man, I wrote a book. Now what?" I'm like, "Okay, well, what was your plan upon writing a book?" "Well, I was thinking maybe I would write a second one, or maybe I would try and put this one out." "Okay, which one do you want to do?" Right? So basically, it comes down to like, have a plan for yourself. Like, do you want to self-pub? Do you want to go through a indie publisher? Do you want to try and get a trad published? So just kind of know where you want to be, and then if you front load the work, like putting together your documentation, right? Like, hey, this is the layout of the dungeon I'm gonna make. This is how I'm going to use skills. These are the rules my skills will have to follow, so that like one level 1 guy doesn't get like sword mastery, and the other guy gets like, you know, collapse the void level 1. You know, what are the rules for making all of this work? And if you don't put something down that says, hey, here's what the limits are, here's what like I mean, if you don't front load that, you're going to have a system that you can't work with past a book or 2 or maybe 3, you know, just because it'll be an unworkable system. You can't expand on it. You can't go any further. So that's what I would say, is front load that work. Yeah.
Okay.
Write what you're passionate about. Doesn't matter if it's LitRPG, Dungeon Core, thriller, fantasy, whatever. Just if you're not passionate about it, you're going to quit halfway through. Mm-hmm. If you enjoy it, you're passionate about it, you're going to keep going because you enjoy it. So that's how I got through my first few books.
Okay, so here's a question that was sent to us by Zach Risley. If you had to be dropped into a Dungeon Core universe, which one would it be and why?
Are we being dropped as a Dungeon Core or just into the universe?
You're just being dropped into the universe. So, where would you rather end up?
Yeah, I'm gonna pass. Worlds with dungeon cores would suck.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, I would say mine just because I know where it's going to end up, but honestly, they're kind of all messed up.
It's true.
I guess it depends on the timeline, man. Am I getting there at the start of it all, or am I getting there near the end? That's a bad idea. I want to get there right in the middle. I want to get there at book 3. Like, oh man, yeah, this place is flying. It's great for cultivating. There's no zombies. Like, yeah, let's do that.
I don't have a specific one. I'd say one that where there's a world where you can respawn somehow or be resurrected. I don't want to die permanently. That would probably be where I would go.
You just want to die repeatedly?
Yes.
Some kind of video game dungeon core.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, so this came from a previously asked question, and it's more of a follow-up. Have you ever thought of using mythology in any of your dungeon series or in anything that you might be writing soon?
Heavily. All my books included mythology. I love mythology. It was always one of my things growing up, so. I even include little tidbits that are lesser known that I've always wondered if people pick up on.
For me, I haven't thought about it, but it's possible in the future. I do research into crafting and that kind of stuff. I don't use a lot of mythology.
Okay.
I like mythology, but I kind of like putting my own spin on it. So, like, hey, this is where those original mythologies came from. Haha, stuff like that. Or, hey, this is why mosquitoes exist. Haha, like stuff like that. It's all meant to be fun, and there are mythologies out there about mosquitoes, right? And just it's unsurprising, I suppose, because everyone has hated them throughout all the time. But yeah, I mean, mythology is super fun, man, and incorporating teeny bits of it is nice. But obviously, if you take too much of it, you're just doing a alternate fictional history. So gotta take care on that. I don't know. Next question.
It's a good source to mix and match stuff. I don't think I've ever lifted anything directly, but it's often a good starting point, right? You can look at, like Dakota was saying, myths of different origins of things and kind of use that to tweak to fit into your particular world.
Okay. So a recent Facebook user asked this. It sounds like each of you has ran or been part of Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. What skills would transfer over well into writing a full book?
So the advantage of running a D&D game instead of just playing in one is that you learn to tell stories that engage readers in real time. Right? If you're the dungeon master and you see your players nodding off, then you quickly learn how to course correct, and that kind of gives you some storytelling chops that you may not otherwise have.
Yeah, I think as a DM, you get to know the other side, and that's what I enjoy about the Dungeon Core. So you get to be the villain, if you want to say. So you know kind of where that's coming from. So it really helps.
I've never actually played D&D. I always wanted to, but it was not a thing in my area growing up. And my parents did not like it because one of my older brothers got super into it. And they hated it after that. So I've always wanted to play, and I've looked into it over the years. And I mean, obviously it's part of an inspiration for my stuff. But yeah, I never had the opportunity, so I have to pass.
Okay. Get that. So another question that came in from one of the Facebook users is, are you guys gardener writers, or architects? Which do you prefer to be?
So are you saying
More-
like,
Answers?
Are you more in the
Those are
idea
answers,
of
right?
yeah, I think
cultivating
that's what
a previous idea of dungeon core, or do you like building your own track?
Gotcha. Because it sounded more like a pantser or plotter sort of question.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that almost everyone starts writing as a pantser, right? So the way that I really like it is I like to hear it is called writing into the dark, right? You kind of just go wherever your mind wanders to, right? And I think everyone kind of starts there. Like you're like, hey, this is something that I'm really passionate about. This is something I really, really love, and I want to see where it goes. But a lot of the time, you don't really understand your own mind, right? You don't understand where these ideas come from or why they work so well, and it's all just kind of like your subconscious, right? Like, and if you can't clearly articulate stuff, you can't continue for long series. You can't continue for a long time doing the thing. So I would say that in general, most of the people that I know that start as pantsers or writing to the dark, whatever it is, eventually turn into plotters, because otherwise, especially in our genres, the S, they're going to really run into trouble, like book 3 plus, right? Because they're just going to hit a wall of information, or they're going to start going over things that they've already done, or they're going to say that this is the rule when actually they've already made the rule and told everyone what the rule is, and now you're just going over it, right? So it's hard, in my opinion, to stay as a pantser for any long-term author career. But other people might do it. I don't know, but I don't.
I'll agree with him. Anything longer than 3 or 4 books, you start running into issues if you're a pantser. I'm a hybrid of sorts. I like to know the ending and then discover it along the way, mainly because when I do it like this, I kind of feel like I'm journaling someone else's journey along the way. Like I'm discovering it with them, which keeps it interesting for me. But since I know the ending, I know what I'm writing towards at the same time. So,
yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really hard to pants long term, just because the scariest part for me in any book is the middle half, right? Because I know where I'm starting and I know where I want to go, but without some guideposts to get through the middle, I get badly bogged down in the swamp. So yeah, it's much faster to plot. I will say that.
I'm the opposite of all of you, apparently. I started out, I plotted everything. I probably wrote more, down in notes and plot points for my first, 5, 6, 7 books than I actually wrote. But after a while, I maybe spend a day getting some notes together, kind of what I want to do, kind of put some mechanics together for the a new series, and then I just pants the rest of it. I may know in general where I want a particular book to end up, but most of the time I just kind of go with it and see where it takes me. And even with my complete series, I didn't know how they were going to end, even on book 1. I just knew it eventually something will happen. So I kind of go with it, and I don't really have a thought in mind where it's going to go. It's just a ride that takes me on while I write it.
I admire your courage, sir. That's all I can say. But you've written a lot of books. I mean, I think part of it too is, right, after you plot enough, I think sometimes it gets kind of ingrained.
Exactly.
yeah, it's obviously working for me either way.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I couldn't do that at first.
Yeah.
It's only been the last year and a half or so that I've really just get some notes and some plot points, but for the most part, it's just been wherever it takes me.
Well, that's why I describe myself as a hybrid, because I've tried full plotting before, and it slows me down because there's a rigidness to it that my characters do not want to do. They want to do their own thing. They want to freestyle. They have their own personalities, and I can't do that with a full plot. So,
So the lesson is do what works for you.
However
many years it takes you to figure that out, just prepare.
I have a whole presentation, Joshua. I have a whole presentation I do on knowing what your characters are going to do, right? And so in my mind, and I say that, you know, oftentimes you'll be writing a character, and they'll be going along, and all of a sudden you'll write something and it just doesn't sound right, you know, and you'll erase it, and they'll kind of go off script and do kind of their own thing, and you're like, this just feels right? So what that actually is that you as a person know how someone with that personality type would actually react in that situation. And so you're writing them to actually fit their personality in a better way, like in a more realistic way. And so I actually have a whole thing where I've put together like how to know how your characters will react in stress and in growth, right? And a lot of that you can just go, if you go to like Enneagram, right, or like online personality things, you can just read up on the psychology of it and just kind of match your character to one of those personality types and traits, and you'll like find that it matches really, really closely, like how you've written them to that point. And it's pretty wild, man. It's pretty wild. So yeah, just
check it out. Maybe it'll work better then.
No, it's kind of and back to the plotting and pantsing, you know, like, but when I write an outline, I don't do like a 40,000 word outline, you know, like I do what I call pirate outlines, right? So they're more guidelines-y, right? Like I call my points author magnets. So when I go really far off, you know, I still have my magnet, my compass that brings me back to what I kind of wanted to see the story doing, right? And in that way, like I get the benefit of being able to do discovery writing of like how to get to those points, but also I know what should be going on so that they don't get bogged down in when the character is going through a hard time or whatever it is. When I'm seeing like, you know, the tragedy of my own life, you know, my own past in this character, I don't like stop writing them and walk away from the series. You know what I mean? So just kind of having those down on paper so that I know where to go from there when I get to that point and just power through that slog through there. Sometimes it's really super duper beneficial. So just another thought for other writers out there or aspiring authors. Yeah.
So a recent comment that we got was, besides it's asking a question, they suggest to you, Dakota, that you should totally DM a campaign so that Josh has an opportunity to experience it.
Dude, I would hang out with any of these guys any day, seriously. Actually, I think the only one of you I haven't hung out with in person is Joshua and Kyle. I don't think I've seen you in person either, so we'll have to fix that.
No, with me being in San Antonio, that's just a little too far for me.
I'm down in Texas every few months.
I'll have to check you out then.
Yeah. I pop over into Austin. There's a huge author community down there. So
nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So another question that your Facebook users or fans asked was, where do you see Dungeon Core heading? Do you think that it could be brought into the Hollywood spectrum of things?
Personally, I would say that it would make a better anime than than full movie, because Hollywood would want to focus on the people going through the dungeon and not the dungeon itself, right? And that would, because that's where the action is. That's where you're going to be seeing things, you know, like if you're having like a science magitech video, you know, for most of your movie, you might not get a ton of people watching it, you know, but it would do well as an anime just because you could do some really cool animations with it. but that's just me. Something I'm working on. Very, very, very far in the future, but.
As far as books go, for like Dungeon Core, you know, I think you're going to see a lot more variety. You're going to see a lot it branching out, looking different. You're not going to have your, you know, like the kind of the original concept. It's a fantasy world with a dungeon, and there's adventurers going through it, and you got goblins and slimes, or you know, anything like that. You're going to see it branch out and do other things. A lot more sci-fi. I think you're going to see. You're going to see post-apocalyptic. You're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff coming out.
Yeah, definitely people trying to do their own original twists. Haunted houses. I mean, you know, just haunted. I don't know, just theme parks. You know, just there's a lot of different things you could go with in the world, with people adding their own twists on it. And as more and more people come into wanting to be writers and do their own original twists, they'll find ways to do it, to expand on it. Actually, that theme park idea sounds kind of fun.
I did that with my Carnival of Fear. That was pretty much.
Yeah, I actually have been needing to read that. You just finished it, didn't you?
I got that out last year, and then for Halloween, and then I have another one coming out. So.
Okay, yeah.
But as far as Dungeon Core in movies, I remember having a conversation in one of my groups. Home Alone was kind of Dungeon Core. Cabin in the Woods, if you've seen that horror movie. I think there was one called The Cube or something like that. So there's some Dungeon Core stories, but they're not labeled as Dungeon Core. So they just have the same kind of theme.
Yeah. Okay. And I would definitely also say that there's. Hello, did I just minimize everyone? I would also say that like it's super cool to see how Dungeon Core and stuff like that is progressing and kind of people's own takes on it, right? Like I read a lot of like Royal Road stuff. I really try to read anything that comes out in the genres that I write in. There's a lot though, so I can't get to all of it. But like anything from, I think the newest one that I've seen is like Become a Dungeon Core. I think now just get super wealthy instead. Like if anyone's seen that one, right? Like it's an interesting, like it's just more interesting takes, you know, like I'm just gonna avoid all of humanity. I mean, currently where it's at right now, I'm just gonna like if I see a human, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna steal from their coin purse, right? I'm not gonna fight them or let them into my dungeon. I'm just gonna send my creatures out to rob them, right? And like currently that's all that's happened so far. That's the whole human interaction. I mean, stuff like that is kind of fun, like. You know, like some people really just embrace the crafting aspect of things, or some people really embrace the adventuring style of it. And I really think, I mean, just like anything else in LitRPG, like Dungeon Core can really turn into anything. You know, like I've seen people like, hey, what if the Dungeon Core is just inside of a person and it walks around? Well, sure, that's how you get around having to draw people in, stuff like that, or whatever it is. Like you can really kind of do whatever you want with it, which is one of the really nice things about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to interrupt you just because we're almost out of time.
Good.
But I'm going to give you a little bit of time to, if you have any new series, like I said, we started with new series. If you have anything that you want to announce, the time is yours.
Well, I have a book coming out next week for Halloween. I think I mentioned it before. It's Community of Fear. It's book 4 of my Spirit Cores series. And then I have a box set of the last 3 books of Dungeon Crafting coming out in November.
Okay. I feel bad because I'm going to cut you off, but I just got to make sure that we get the code word put in. So for all those that are following along for the code word giveaway, the code word is LitCON 2021. So we are so excited. We are so glad that you each had the opportunity to visit with me. And this was a thrill for me. Like I'm a huge fan of each of you four, and I'm so excited that I had the opportunity to visit and ask the questions.
Cool, man.
Thank
Well, it's super
you.
nice to meet you as well.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks
It was
for having
a pleasure
me.
to have this with y'all.
Yeah. Last thing, just notification that you can go to the chat window in Discord.
All right.
But otherwise, y'all take care.
All right, thank you.
Sounds good, man.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks to everyone who watched this.